Anyway, welcome back to everyone. Welcome back to everyone. Can I start over? Start over. Great to have you all here. I'm gonna be honest, I ended up changing the topic of this share after typing up almost the entirety of what I was going to talk about, only to realize that it wasn't exactly as coherent as I wanted it to be, so I scrapped that and we're talking about something else now. I will probably go back to that one that I scrapped in the future at some point when it is more coherent, but today we're going to be shifting gears over to something else, and we're going to be talking about tests. Not the pen and paper kind of tests that you get graded on, though. We're going to be discussing the tests that God gives us and why he gives us tests at all, kind of. So let's talk about that. So first of all, what do I mean by a test given to us by God? God is always trying to grow us to be better followers of him and ultimately better people. But just like learning a subject in school, we have to take tests to prove that we've learned what we're being taught, right? With God, it's a little less straightforward than that, because oftentimes we're taking the test across a long period of time rather than as like all right, it's time for the test. Of what you've learned. Think of when Jesus called Peter out to walk on the water with him, right? The test wasn't just in that last moment where he looked at the waves and got scared and lost faith. The test was the whole thing. The test was his first step out. The test was the next steps that followed as he was walking towards Jesus. The whole thing was the test. And then he just failed at one point. So Jesus was trying to teach Peter to have faith in him. Ultimately, Peter failed that test, but it's a good example of how God teaches us. He teaches us through tests like these. Well, not exactly tests like these, because at least nowadays anyway, but real-world trials of faith to grow us closer to him. So sometimes it can be hard to pass a test that he's giving us. Once we recognize that God is trying to teach us something, we can work towards passing that test, whatever it might be. And it can take us quite a long time to pass a test in some cases. It may even feel like we have already passed the test. We might think that we've learned what God is trying to teach us, but it doesn't seem to be moving past whatever that test was. It doesn't seem to be going anywhere. Most of the time when we feel like that, we haven't actually passed the test yet, but that's beside the point. Anywho, we always have to be praying about what God is trying to teach us through our situations and moving towards passing the test. But when we do finally pass the test, we have to be ready for what God has for us next. So I've been struggling with something internally that God has been trying to teach me over the past few months, and depending on how you look at it, even in the entire past year. And in the past couple weeks, I felt like I had a really solid grasp on it finally. Like, I just felt really at peace about it. Felt like I finally had it. And I know this is going to be vague, but think of it like this. So, I wasn't exactly sure to what extent God was trying to teach me this thing. So if we say that up here was what God might have been trying to teach me, I really only passed up to here of the test. And that's because I wasn't sure if all the way up here was the full extent of what he was trying to teach me. I wasn't sure about all the way up here, but I knew that down here for sure he was trying to teach me. So I focused on that part. I focused on coming to terms with those things and passing that point of the test. But it wasn't until I had finally passed that part that God revealed to me, hey, I actually do need you to pass this part of the test too. And to be honest, I was a little frustrated because part of me coming to pass this part of the test was coming to terms with the fact that this part of the test may never actually happen. I didn't know yet. But as soon as I got to here, God was like, actually, I need you to go up here too. So it's like, really? Like I had peace about this for like 2 weeks. And now I'm stressing again. But why did it take me so long to get to this to get to this middle point? It's because I was so focused on trying to figure out whether the full extent was the final test of what he was trying to teach me. That I barely considered just learning from what I was sure of, the middle part. I spent so much time trying to pass the final exam before I had passed the midterm. So you get the idea? Lots of times we want to do that. We want to know the full extent of what God is trying to teach us. That isn't always how it's going to work. We have to take it bit by bit and learn each individual lesson before we can pass the full test or the final exam. If you started a class in school and tried to take the final exam on the first day, you're probably not going to do so hot. Now, depending on the class, you might actually do fine, but that's not the point, because most of the time that doesn't happen, okay? Most of the time it doesn't happen. You can't pass the final exam on the first day. That's the whole point of having the class, right? So for comparison's sake, let's say you cannot pass the final exam on the first day. The same is true for the tests that God gives us. We all want to go straight to whatever that big thing is that God is trying to teach us, when oftentimes we have to learn several smaller lessons leading up to that bigger test. We know God is trying to teach us something bigger. We see it on the horizon, but we can't go straight there. We have to start the class from the beginning, and we have to take all the prerequisite tests before we can take the final exam. We have to focus on what he's trying to teach us in the moment that will lead us to that final exam in the future. Looking back, I definitely see why I needed to pass the midterm before I could take the final. It took me a long time to see that and to come to that conclusion. But it makes sense. It makes sense looking back. So my encouragement to you guys who might be chasing after that final exam that you see God putting on your life, take a step back and see if there are any smaller tests that you need to pass before you're ready for that final exam. Because oftentimes we're not ready for the final exam right from the start. Because passing those smaller tests will prepare you for the big one. So that's all I have for you guys today. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I definitely find it pretty interesting. Hopefully I conveyed that well to you guys. But if you guys learned something completely different, then let me know. Because that'd be great to hear about in the chat if you're here live, or in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. But with all that concludes SeraphShares. That's gonna do it. We're gonna go play some Warframe now. Hey.